Okay, let's get this off. Hi and welcome. This is our second lunchtime talk by Para Site, and thank you to Asia Art Archive for supporting us with the venues. Just basically, this is a more casual sort of conversation topic between Maha Maamoun and us, and we will be looking briefly at 3 works that she did over 2009, 2010, and 2011. Basically, Domestic Tourism 2, which was commissioned by the 9th Sharjah Biennial and was awarded the Biennale Jury Prize. 2026, that was done in 2010. That followed after, and also Night Visitor, the night of counting the years in 2011. So we invited Maha here because partially there has been a relationship with Maha, like previously in a previous project that I curated called the Floating Infinity Project that was in September to November 2013, and subsequently she's also participating in our current exhibition, the Golden Heights Estate, which is part of Meeting Point 7 that was co-curated by WHW and Para Site. Just a basic introduction, Maha Maamoun lives and works in Cairo, Egypt. She works mainly in the medium of photography and video, and often starts with the generic visual presentations of Cairo to explore how these intersect with and are negotiated through personal experience. Maha is one of the founding members of the Contemporary Image Collective, a space for contemporary art culture in Cairo, and she was also the assistant curator for Meeting Points 5, and she participated in other exhibitions such as Homeworks 5 in Beirut, the 9th Sharjah Biennial, Global Cities at Tate Modern, the 10th Venice Biennale of Architecture, the 5th Biennale of African Photography in Bamako, and so on. So without further ado, please welcome Maha.
Yeah, we thought yesterday, Qinyi and me, like where to start from, what to talk about, and we thought that there are 3 works that kind of link nicely together, and that maybe it's better to talk about these 3 works. And my last work is in Para Site. It's this new video, and this book project is also like, so these are the last 2 projects I've done. So yeah, so what do we start from?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not too sure how many people are familiar with Domestic Tourism 2. Have anybody seen it in the previous exhibition or online, the excerpts? It's basically a 62-minute clip which Maha worked through the archive of Egyptian cinema, starting with the earliest film in 1952, and splicing together different visual representation of pyramids and motif, and seeing how they are subverted within the whole notion of representation, or who controls the modes of representation. Part of it that we were talking about that was kind of interesting because of the floating eternity was also the idea of the tradition. And when you talk about graveyards, how is it read in, whether it's in Hong Kong, which is a loaded argument about space, or traditions, or whether in Cairo, which becomes sort of repeated through like different lenses, but you see it as sort of claiming this national identity. So I do have a few questions because like we spoke about having a few clips, seeing like how you chose the different clips. Would you mind talking about it?
No. So yeah, I was interested in how the pyramids are used in Egyptian cinema as because I was interested to see like we always see the pyramids as a site for tourism, and we always mostly look at them through postcards and things like so, through the touristic kind of material that is generated for an outside viewer. And one hardly sees like these pyramids in an Egyptian kind of from the Egyptian eye. This doesn't really get highlighted. What gets highlighted is how it's packaged for a foreign audience. So I was interested to see how, and also the way they're packaged for a foreign audience is that they're completely dissociated from their present context. They're kind of packaged as this kind of glorious past that people visit and that belongs to this great civilization. And of course, you do not want to link it to the present context, which is completely full of problems and complexities and poverty and corruption and all of that. So it's kind of always packaged, the past is kind of packaged and kept on the side and not linked to the present in any way. And the pictures of the pyramids in promotional material, you always have the pyramids with the background of like this extending desert. And you do not see, when actually in reality the pyramids have become right on the edge of the city. Like the city has extended so much that had reached really the foot of the pyramids. But in the postcards and all of this, you always see it as if it's in a placeless, timeless kind of space. So this is what started my interest in this project. And I chose to look at them and the pyramids through Egyptian films. And I was just by coincidence, I came across a film and was very curious to see how the pyramids were used as a backdrop, like in a theater, like how they kind of make the backdrop the stage. So it was interesting to see how the stage was set up with the pyramid in the middle and a conversation is choreographed in front of it between the two protagonists. So this started me just thinking about, okay, so what kind of conversations do directors want to have in front of the pyramids? So what scenes do they choose to film in front of the pyramids? What are the protagonists saying? And of course the pyramids are a symbol of Egypt and a symbol of the past, and so it's a kind of a loaded symbol, and the dialogue that happens in front of it is often there for a reason. So in the end I made like a survey, like a research of a lot of films. And I chose to start, like Egyptian cinema is more than 100 years old, but I chose to start from, the earliest scene I chose was around 1950 or 1952. And I chose to, like with the research I kind of understood the genres. There's certain kind of topics that are repetitive and certain kind of, so I made a selection and in the end made a very chronological structure for the film, because a lot of these scenes in the end are, many of them are loaded with a conversation that relates to the state of Egypt, the people of Egypt, you know, the history. So I tried to be as less heavy-handed as possible by using this chronological structure, which starts from like the most recent films, goes back to the oldest films I've used, but then escalates again to the newest films. So it's not like a looking only back or looking forward, it kind of moves. So I'll show you like a clip, so you get a...
أنا صاحب فرعون بل إني أنا فرعون عبدني الناس منفجر الظهور واختلفت أسمائي باختلاف العصور. مالك حسن؟ أنا حسن فهنتي بهلول، أنا المسكين في هذا الزمان، أنا المحاط بالأوهام، أنا الذي إذا باع نام، أنا المخدوع بالكلام، أنا استرقت يا علي، استرقت يا علي، استرقت. سرقنا بكل الأشكال يا حبيبي. كويس إن بيقولوا الأهرام لسه ما سرقوش، عشان دي حجارة يا حسن. هو لازم كل حاجة في بلادنا تبقى حجارة عشان ما تسرقش يا علي؟ حتى الحب والروح الحلوة السنة يا علي. واخرتها يا علي، اخرتها ايه يا علي؟
هل الحضارات إلا واحات في أشراط الجهال؟ يا عجب، وهل كان بناتها إلا بشرا مثلنا؟ جعلوا من هذه الصروح الشماء قبورا لتخلد أسماؤهم على مر القرون ويقهر مجدهم عاديات السنين.
أي حتة لا أتكلم.
بعدين يا علي، أنا موقفي بقى حرج قوي. بابا وماما كل يوم يفتحوني في موضوع الجواز ده. بصراحة مش عارفة أعمل معاهم إيه.
مش عارف أقول لك إيه رجاء. اسمعي، لو زنقوك يعترف لهم هيحصل إيه بس؟
بتبقى مصيبة.
على العموم ما تفكريش دلوقتي في الموضوع ده. خلينا في اللحظة الجميلة اللي احنا فيها. شوف يا رجاء، شوف المكان هنا هادي ومريح ازاي. ايه رأيك؟ ما تيجي نتخيل ان كل المكان ده بيتنا.
شوف النادي أنت فايق إزاي.
يا عبيطة خير مش هتكلفنا حاجة. الواقع بقى صعب نعيشه. بس هو مش بيت جميل. ها؟ ادي السطح. وهنا هو بقى تحت اهو الانتريه. هو بقى اللي هو في الدور الثاني اهو اوضه النوم.
استنى بقى.
اوبا. انا حاسس اني تعبان بجد.
علي، علي أنت اتجننت.
خايفة من ايه؟ قولي ده بيتنا. محدش هنا هيقدر يضايقنا. أرض حضرت 7000 سنة في الحضورة.
علي، أرجوك يا علي.
بحبك يا ربيع. بحبك.
علي أرجوك.
I think it's rather interesting, like when you see the instances of like how the roles of the pyramids actually play within it. Like other than a postcard, there are also other intersections that we spoke about. The random scenes where people would just drive up to the pyramids and, for instance, several paths and having the physical landscape kind of dominating the scene, or to give it gravitas itself. So it was something that I was kind of questioning as well, like the use of such physical landscape. That you spoke about the importance of the pyramids itself, but also like about the landscape and how it dominates, which also like sometimes also leads on to your next work itself, which is like 2026, basically something that you chose out of a book that was called Revolution of 2053. But you were also talking about how it came from your research out of domestic tourism too as well. So would you like to talk more about it?
Yeah, so also another line of interest in this work was to see how, as opposed to the pyramids with the background of the desert and like timeless, placeless kind of presentation, is to see how they actually link to the city, to the fabric of the city, and to conversations that are started in the kind of dense city, and how impossible certain situations are, and what people need to kind of step out a bit and go to the pyramids to. Why do they jump in a car and go to the pyramids to say what, and why is it more possible there? And so this was also interesting for me, and to see also how the pyramids kind of are placed in the narrative of film, not just the narrative of the city. While I was doing this research, I came across a book that was called The Revolution of 2053, and it had the pyramids on its cover. And this I came across it in 2008, so it was like way before. And so I was interested to see, like, so okay, how are the pyramids being thought about in a kind of futurist context? Because in all the films here, it's basically old films up to the present moment. So I was curious to see how they're placed in the future. But then, unfortunately, like I was talking to, like the book turned out to be like very literal about the present. There was nothing in it that was like about a future moment, like that was no kind of imagination of anything different than what we were in 2007, 2008. So, and I talked to the writer later, and he did say that yeah, he was just using the future as a ploy so that he is able to talk about the present as usual. I mean, it's kind of a usual kind of thing. So if you're not able to talk about the present, you talk about it as the past or as the future, or you have like all these animal fables that are very political. You have talk about the situation went on, you know. So he said, so it was really a literal kind of transcription of the kind of closed situation that Egypt was witnessing at the moment, where there's basically no kind of way out. They cannot really think of any alternatives or. So yeah, it was kind of curious for me to see how a book that the cover and the title promised to be kind of imagining a future, in the end were just really about a present that we know so well in a very tired language and imagery and all of that. And from that book I chose the scene that was happening around the pyramids. And yeah, it was very much, it reminded me very much that scene of another work, the Lajati by Chris Marker. And in both works there's a time traveler. This was like a very common. In both works there was a time traveler who, through images, was able to enter into time. So either travel to the past or travel to the future. And in 2026, in the novel, the man is able to take, for example, takes photographs of the pyramids and is able to see what will happen in that space in the year 2026. And again, it was a situation of black and white kind of juxtaposition. So the rich and the poor separated by a wall, and the rich throw leftovers to the poor, who are kind of prevented from viewing the pyramids because it becomes like the exclusive right of the very rich, and all of this kind of scenario, which is always like how things are presented, which is, I mean, there is truth to it, but it's not, it's kind of like the simplest first layer kind of explanation of the complexity of the situation by just putting it into this black and white kind of presentation. Yeah, so I made a connection between the text of the novel and Lajati, between these two travelers. One, like in Lajati, who was really kind of more able to travel in time, or something happened in Lajati where he was able to help his people. But in this one, it really is kind of, the protagonist really, nothing happens. So I can show you a bit of that film. And tell me when to stop showing. Yeah? Okay. So the text is from the novel and the visual is an imitation of, like a restaging of the time traveler from La Jetée, just like the same way of photography.
بدأ ينور من كبر حجمه، شكله كأنه هيلمس الأرض عند هضبة الأهرامات والبيروت. المكان كله مضاء إضاءة غير مباشرة. سفح الهرم الوسطاني منسق بعناية جديدة، الأرضية رخام مرسوم عليها رسوم بديعة بيشع منها نور كأنها بتنور من تحت. كل حاجة نظيفة وبتبرد، ومفيش أي أثر لتراب هضبة الهرم. من زاوية تانية شايف مركب الشمس بتلمع جوه مبنى إزاز شفاف كأنها عين. حوالين الأهرامات من كل ناحية مفيش غير مسطحات خضراء منسقة برضه بعناية جديدة. مش شايف أي مباني حوالين المكان، كل العشوائيات ملهاش أثر، كأنه تم مسحها من الوجود. المبنى الوحيد الظاهر في الأفق هو المتحف المصري الكبير، تماثيل وعربيات فرعونية وتحف مختلفة في صناديق إزاز منورة بإضاءة غير مباشرة، ومزينة المكان كله بطريقة بديعة. شايف مجموعة من كور الإزاز الضخمة حوالين مطعم القبة. بعض الكور الإزاز دي مطاعم وملاهي ليلية، وبعضها قاعات اجتماعات واحتفالات. شايف كمان بباري إزاز معلقة بتوصل من الكور عند أدوار معينة، دقة متناهية في التفاصيل المعمارية. سطحات شفافة، خطوط معدنية رقيقة، ساحات شاسعة الخضرة على مدى البصر. شايف من قريب ترابيزات أكل مرصوصة في أشكال هندسية منتظمة، ترابيزات مترتبة بعناية جديدة بتوزع عليها تماثيل رائعة منحوتة من التلج بتدوب ببطء شديد. كل أنواع الأكل موجودة. بحاول إني أقرب أكتر شوية، مش قادر أميز أصناف كتيرة، بس واضح إن في مأكولات بحرية كتير، كافيار وسوشي، استاكوزا ضخمة. كل الحاضرين لابسين هدوم قمة في الغرابة والأناقة. معظمهم شكلهم مش مصري، ملامحهم شرقية بس مش عرب. ناس ملامحهم أوروبية وفي ناس ملامحهم آسيوية. الكل بياكل في بطء شديد جدا، كأنهم في فيلم معروض بالسرعة البطيئة. شايف جرسونات جنب كل ترابيزة في هولوجرام، لما بيمرر حد ايده عليه بيظهر من فتحة في نص الترابيزة أصناف مختلفة من الأكل والشرب. في حاجة غريبة في خلفية الصور، حاجة مش طبيعية. المنظر ورا الأهرامات شكله طبيعي، لكن الناحية اللي قصاد الأهرامات خلفيتها شكلها مش طبيعي، في خط غريب في الأرض، سور رفيع محيط بالمنطقة كلها، مش سور عادي، ده شاشة عملاقة تعرض صورة وهمية لامتداد هضبة الهرم، مخبية من منظر المدينة القديمة المتهالكة. برج مراقبة كل 10 أمتار في السور، كل برج جنبه أوضة، وفي ناس بيراقبوا المكان وقدامهم أجهزة وشاشات كتير. في حركة غريبة، إشارات من الأبراج وحاجة بتتحرك من بعيد، عربية جاية من بعيد، مصفحة وإزازها أسود، عاملة عفرة وتراب حواليها. العربية بتهدي، شايف عيال كتير بتجري ورا العربية ومحوطاها. العيال شبه عرايا لابسين خرق يدوب ستراهم، رؤوسهم محروقة وعينيهم واسعة وغويطة، جلد على عظم، كأنهم هياكل عظمية. العيال بيحاولوا يمسكوا العربية ويدخلوها بأي شكل، بيصرخوا بشكل جنوني وبيخبطوا عليها. العربية ماشية ثبات، مفيش حاجة بتأثر فيها، كأنها ماشية في زمن تاني. قربت العربية من أوضة ببرج مراقبة، صريخ العيال عالي بشكل هستيري جدا. فجأة بيسكتوا وبيبصوا ناحية البرج كأنهم سمعوا إشارة. في حتة بتفتح في السور وبيترمي بس على بعد حوالي 20 متر. الأكياس بتتفتح لما بتخبط في الأرض. العيال سابت العربية وبدأوا يجروا بسرعة على الأكياس، خطف وضرب ونهش، خناقة رهيبة على الأكل. في نفس الوقت العربية بتدخل ببطء شديد جوه الأوضة وبيتقفل وراها الباب، وبينزل من العربية راجل وست في قمة الأناقة. الحيطة اللي قصادهم إزاز بيطل على هضبة الهرم، أما الحيطان التلاتة التانيين زي السور، معروض عليهم صور لمناظر طبيعية خلابة.
Actually, this work itself, when you talk about appropriation of imagery, there's also another dimension to it, that part of this work was also appropriated by the Hong Kong International Film Festival in 2013 for the Chris Marker poster retrospective that they did in April last year.
Yeah, so I heard about this festival and I saw an image of my actor, the Egyptian guy, on the poster of the retrospective for Chris Marker. It was a mistake, they just found it on the internet.
Did you tell them?
No, but I want a pamphlet. I want one of those. It was like a pamphlet or a poster. I'd love to have it.
We actually called them out, and they said they're out of the brochures and they never printed any posters. So
Yeah.
if anybody have a copy of this paraphernalia, she would like to have a copy.
Yeah.
But other than that, like looking at the other way, moving away from the behavior and a more weightier burden of history and the future, we also spoke about questions about science fiction, because like previously we also had a resident who was talking about Chinese science fiction, Ming Wang, and also the historical linkages that how it doesn't seem, while in the past, let's say when Ming was doing his historical retrospective, was this idea of science fiction as a medium of looking into a better country. And you also briefly mentioned about during this phase that you were doing this research into science fiction or Egyptian science fiction, that you found it was like strangely limiting and lacking the vocabulary. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just curious also as a way. So this film was made in 2010, so also actually a few months before the revolution, when the atmosphere was really like everybody, all we could talk about was like how close the horizon is. Like in personal talks, it was just all the time we were kind of repeating ourselves to each other about how hopeless everything looks, and then the revolution happened, and I mean, things are, I don't know, taking a even worse turn, but yeah. So at the time I was researching, trying to find new ways of looking at things. And when I came across this book, for example, The Revolution of 2053, it ended up being a disappointment, and there's no kind of original language or imagery in it to propose something for the future. And I also started looking, okay, so what about science fiction in general? Maybe there you will find some kind of interesting formulations of a different, and I really didn't find much at all, which was kind of strange. Yeah, I mean, as much as I research also like historically the internet, there are some examples of science fiction writing and films, but it's really quite limited and kind of derivative. There's not so many examples, very, very few for some reason, I don't know why. Yeah, you have people kind of coming up with all sorts of theories why it doesn't exist, but yeah, I don't know.
I wonder, there was a, sorry, can I?
Yeah, sure.
There was a project in the 2007 Sharjah Biennial by the Dutch artist Marjolein Diekman. I don't know if you know.
She was compiling also science fiction films.
She similarly struck by the lack of science fiction in both sort of West Asia but also South Asia, and then thought about, the project consisted of two parts. One was a film, which was spliced together films about imagining the future in Indian cinema, in Arab cinema, in Hollywood, chronologically. Yeah. From the past till wherever the future is imagined, and then she built a couple of green rooms. Yeah. And the idea was that students from sort of Sharjah, etc., could come in, film themselves, and then insert themselves into the future.
Into the films.
So they could film themselves in the green room and insert themselves into the future, as imagined by these films. I don't know whether that may have, this sort of lack of science fiction. Yeah. Maybe an interesting project for you to look at.
Yeah, for sure. I remember seeing the film, but I didn't. That other part, I didn't know. I saw the green setup, but I didn't know how that was part of the same project. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who've done better research in that area, and that I haven't yet. I'm sure it's an interesting topic. I'm sure some people have researched, but when I was doing this, I didn't come across in terms of the Arab science fiction. I didn't come across it so much. Yeah.
But this also leads on to like the third work that sort of like creates this entire cycle, actually ends off, or more depressingly does not end off, because it's actually, as you spoke before, it leaves behind a very ambiguous kind of ending. But this work itself, The Night Visitor, the last work in 2011, is actually a compilation of YouTube clips actually taken during the revolution itself, where there were people breaking into the second security
state security building.
State security building, and going through the documentation and as well documents and antiquities. But other than that, this was also like, other than the imagery of splicing together, was also pulling out from similarly cinematic history, which you seem to have a very strong link to. So would you mind explaining that part?
Yeah, so yeah, a few months after the revolution, of course, all we could do was watch footage of what's happening, news. There was no way possible that you would have the energy or the interest to look at any kind of images, other images than what's going on, because it was always something is happening, always something is happening. So in March, just 2 months after the revolution, there was this kind of growing fear. It was still like things were still like people on the street. Nothing is really changing, and everybody's kind of like being very on their toes, watching, seeing what they're going to do, how power is being transferred or not transferred, and all of that. And then there was this kind of fear that the state security are going to destroy evidence that incriminates them. So all the documents in the state security buildings, that they're being destroyed, burned. And there were instances where the smoke was seen coming out of state security buildings, so they thought, okay, we have to break in, regular people, we have to break in and just take hold of these documents. And so they did in several buildings, and then these regular citizens, many of them very young kids, with their mobile phones were documenting this as they went in. So documenting just like the entry, like the victory of entering into this very kind of closed off space, but also documenting things that they found. So like documents that they felt were very important, they would just film, or they would like document what they saw was incriminating evidence, including like fancy chandeliers, like paintings of European landscapes, stuff like this, which was, for me actually in the end, was more interesting to see. Because in the end you get so over the images of like shredded documents and torture devices, and these things are all over the news, you get to see them, they're kind of also direct. And so I was interested in more kind of hidden kind of things, like when people walk into these spaces and they look at kind of signs of wealth rather than signs of corruption. And shows just like, and these are young kids, and then you have people saying, oh, we can't even get married, and look at them living in all this, like, look at this fancy furniture, stuff like this. So these kinds of comments were more interesting for me. They kind of showed more, exposed more, kind of a deeper psychological layer than the first, like, political corruption and, things. So it shows more, a deeper look into the psyche of the people who are breaking in and what they're looking at. So I looked at a lot of these videos, and at the end made a kind of an edit that I felt showed more this kind of other layer that is not so direct and not so clear. Like there's no real trophies. But also because also at the time when I made it, things were so changing and in flux that it was very hard to kind of decide that this is the narrative and this is what happened, or this is, it was very hard to kind of fix things, and it was like the need to keep things kind of fluid was really important. So not to come out with definite kind of statements out of this event or this incident of going into the state security buildings. So I can show you a bit of that film, and the film is called Night Visitor. Night Visitor is a term that was known from the time of Nasser, 50s. It basically refers to police who come and arrest activists or things from their home at night. So these are called the night visitors. And in this situation, I felt it's the reverse, where the arrested are now, arresting. So they are returning the visit, basically. And the longer title, The Night of Counting the Years, comes from a very famous Egyptian film from the early 60s by Shadi Absalam. It's kind of a very unique, one of its kind really films in Egyptian history, where it's about a moment of change, like the moment of change that we are witnessing in the revolution in 2011, a moment of change between two eras or two kind of visions of state or of nationhood or something, where the original film is like where you have a family in Upper Egypt that have found a tomb with a lot of treasures from ancient Egypt, and it's basically treasures in the ground, belongs to no one, and they're selling it for profit, and but they're keeping it secret as kind of a family kind of thing. But then they're faced with the new kind of a new ministry of antiquities, like the nation state as it kind of modern state as it builds up. So the Ministry of Antiquities, the new legislation regulating the selling of antiquities, writing of history, and what is kind of extending the timeline for the nation. All of these things. So I felt similarities with the YouTube videos of the break into the state security buildings, of people really encountering something that looks like a catacomb with layers of documents and information that go back way in time, and which they are trying to string together to come up with a revised history of the past, but also to kind of try to get themselves, kind of collect evidence, write a new history, and all of that. So this was interesting for me. Kind of not very clear here because of the light. So this, for example, they found belly dancing suits in the state security building. And these were used by the state security officers to humiliate the political prisoners. So basically they let them wear belly dancing suits, but I mean, it also apart from that, it also kind of felt like it gives you an idea of the status of women also, and how, we can show, since it's kind of hard to see in this cars. And so this comes from a clip that was titled "The Cars of the Privileged," and this is an ancient Egyptian statue found in one of the cars of the state security officers. So again, it's adding to this feeling of like a catacomb and finding layers and layers of stolen information. These are like all the heads of the state security building, state security apparatus. One of the cells, writings on the wall. So also again, like the title, also the night of counting the years was appropriate for this work also because in so many videos you had people going into cells, like when they broke into the building and like they recognized where they had been imprisoned before, and there were all these kind of recitations of years and dates and things. So I've been here from March 2000 to April 2005, and then another one goes in and it's like, yeah, I remember this cell, I've been here from this day to this day. So, and also going through the documents and different that extend way back. Yeah.
And like stepping back, when we look at such proliferation of imagery, you can also see it like key role that it played during the first revolution inside Tahrir Square, the moment where Vodafone cut off the telephone lines and people took to Twitter and the internet to actually try to bring news of the revolution going. I mean, in that sense, that has really like kind of helped that creation of the image, like in a more widespread way, the creation of the image archive, which like People's Scholar also mentions at some point. But I'm just wondering, since like there is this instance where your art is like so close to encountering the social, wherein like how do you talk about it without putting it within that context? How can you pull away when you think of pulling away or dropping it?
Like how do I pull away from talking directly about the social?
You mentioned about like, kind of making it a bit more neutral in some of your, well, not neutral, softening rather than making it direct.
Well, in this one, for example, when I did it, it was really in the middle of everything that's happening. It was a way of kind of trying to kind of find my way through all of this avalanche of information and material. But I did not have a strong grip on what was happening or that I wanted to say something in particular. It was just kind of trying to find my way out of this. But also, things were unraveling all the time. So for example, like I decided to take out the sound, for example, even though sound was one of the things that attracted me most to this material, just the things people were saying while they're entering and like all the kids like commenting on the things, it was just amazing, the tone and what they were saying in particular. But then it was just a bit overwhelming while I was working on the film, and then I thought, okay, I'll just work with the images and I'll keep the sound till later. But then when I finished with that, I tried to get back to the sound. It was kind of impossible, but also for other, like it was also, there were decisions like, in some of the footage I'm using, for example, and these are like decisions that were just a product of the moment. So for example, several of the people had a kind of Islamist kind of intonation, and with the way the kind of vocabulary they were using shows that they were kind of maybe Islamist, maybe Muslim brothers who were entering into these buildings. And which is, I mean, what was annoying at that moment was that for people who have joined the revolution when it first started, the Muslim Brothers were not really on the street in the first very dangerous days. They were kind of keeping out of the picture until things looked like they are happening, then they arrived on the scene and started claiming everything. So claiming all the street fights, claiming all the victories on the street and all of this. And this was like extremely really kind of terrible to witness, especially for people who know how things happen on the ground. And so when I was looking at this footage and I find some, and this is like happened months later, this footage, but just a personal reaction was like, no, I don't want to I don't want this to be claimed, by, so these are kind of, I will keep it neutral. I do not want this to be taken off, signed by any one kind of particular direction. Even there were kids from all sorts of things, but like voices from all sorts of directions. But yeah, things like this where, okay, so I do not want to really have this as, what was happening always was like something happens and then somebody tries to claim it and use it for their own. So I was trying to keep this as kind of open or ambiguous as possible. Yeah, the voice had a lot of information. I suppressed that information. I thought, okay, I'm interested in whatever information comes through the visual, and that's it in this particular work. In domestic tourism, it's all about the social political context of this historical icon or this the past. Yeah. So how using cinema was a way of kind of engaging that. So trying to see a more complex narrative that surrounds these symbols of the past. So yeah, so in that project, I was totally choosing a medium, and that kind of actually gives more social context to an icon that is always presented without a social context or without a kind of timely political context. It's always shown as like just a pile of stones from the past that refer to a past civilization, but that no connection is made to the present.
I mean, we also this is supposed to be a conversation, so feel free to jump in anytime too.
I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Just about lack of science fiction and mentioned about, and also about icons of old civilizations. I mean, it's like for old civilization like Egypt or like China, it's a very long history and have a very long, glorious past. Mm-hmm. It seems like when we move forward and dream about the future, you always kind of think in terms of Renaissance.
Yes.
Kind of like
we are talking about, yes,
go back to the
golden
past.
age. Yeah.
So I guess that maybe that's why there's always looming over the icons is there, even not just collective memories, but also especially traditional mediums like film or novel, which in contrast to the other YouTube videos when we are in the juncture of moving forward. I think it's kind of interesting. Maybe that's why there's lack of science fiction.
I was thinking the same. I was talking to Qinyi yesterday that maybe countries with kind of an old history that had kind of more glorious moments in the past.
It's convenient to.
It's kind of, it comes to mind easy or something that okay, what's better? Let's look back to that time when things were great and try to redo it and reform in that in that style. Yeah, I think it's always kind of, and this is kind of so this very strong Islamist kind of political imagination for the future is mainly kind of, most of it is kind of resurrecting an older, more glorious kind of past or model or yeah.
I think there are instances where this, predominantly older civilization, maybe in a more general sense that may work, but in China there is also the interesting instance where during the 100 Days of Reform, during the Qinyi Emperor, Liang Qichao, who's a student of Kang Youwei, he was actually the first Chinese translator of Jules Verne as medium of looking into the future back in the late 19th century to the early 20th. Now, also relooking the whole nostalgia, for me it's really interesting for Hong Kong because right now you look at films like Pacific Rim, The Ghost in the Shell, all of this derive a kind of futuristic dystopia, like Kowloon, Walled City, Pacific Rim looks at Hong Kong, the space in Hong Kong, as a kind of future itself, like against monsters and all, but through the lenses of a Spanish director who did Pan's Labyrinth, a Japanese anime director, but none from the local, well, maybe Wong Kar-wai, 2046, but that was predominantly it. But you don't really see, there's still this romanticization of like destruction, or which is still present itself. When you look at Ghost in the Shell, it uses Kowloon street signs and everything in the backdrop to actually run around. So, I mean, I'm into looking into science fiction for the future. Like we were talking about, whether is it a case that the future, the promise of the future is so close now, because when you think of time as a unit, has been predominantly shortened by internet or by like, you know, news media and so on, that there is no differentiation in time as a unit to the human life. There is no way that you can reflect upon or reconstruct a different strategy to deal with. Because like in the past, when you think about, and this is something that we spoke about, when you think about Jardine Matheson, how they have the house up, they used to have the summer house up in the hill, in the peak, how they would overlook into the bay and look at the ships coming in, and when the ships come in, they would send their own boat to collect the news and not the goods. The first thing they do is to collect the news from overseas and bring back and interpret it, so they would have 6 hours ahead before the market opens in Hong Kong. So when you think about time as a unit, and given the profusion of like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, social media, definitely, it becomes very short. There is no way everybody just consciously, subconsciously reacts to it, as opposed to like really strategically positioning themselves to construct a new, say, strategy. That was pretty much, that was also a strategy that has been used by the activists in Tahrir Square themselves. Like they were very cognizant about it, and how they were bombing Facebook after the phone lines were cut, to actually like, you know, using linking Twitter to Facebook to actually like profuse to transfer the information out, and to actually ask for aid and so on. If you were to look at like the Facebook as a geographic landscape for that time, this was pretty much what was going on. So this is a roundabout way of saying, like, you know, I think that it's more like, I think it's easy to think about the nostalgia of the past, but like we have to think about time as like, in a unit sense, like how does it deal with our own reaction to it? And
there's a bit of conflation going on. I think in terms of science fiction, if you even think about, you know, your American science fiction, there's how technology is dealt with, and then there's how the social is dealt with. And in most instances, if you think about the models for the social, they're actually medieval and even pre-modern. So if you think about the Dune series, or if you think about Asimov and the Foundation series, and all these great pillars of science fiction, their imagination of people to people and societal structures will probably have more in common with the societies of the pyramids than they would with the societies of Twitter and Facebook. And it's only the technology and what you could do, or how time could be dealt with, or, you know, minds could be read, that would sort of transform. So in a way, I don't think science fiction gets us away from that conundrum that you're talking about. It's just a mode of engagement with it.
Have you read like recent science fiction that is more deals in kind of interesting ways with time? Or
that was multi-universe P.S. Anthony was good. That was interesting. When he travels, like he had this entire series itself. It's kind of science fiction, but it's also like immortal. Like he picks like a key character, sort of the divine good or the divine bad, and also like Greek mythological gods who perfuse through life itself in your actions, how they travel through time can actually correct or miscorrect certain decisions that were done as well. Mm-hmm. Like the god of war himself, like how does he enact war, and how does war appear? Is war a necessity and so on. So it's a very interesting series of stuff that was done like 1990. Mm-hmm.
But again, as you're describing it, it sounds like myth. No? So if you're looking at, say, Western Asian equivalents, Dastani Amir Hamza or Tilsam Hoshruba, coming out of the Iranian traditions, where myth and magic could easily sort of swing into science fiction.
I attended part of a lecture where the lecture was about science fiction, but I just arrived late to it, and one of the speakers was talking about finding, because everybody's saying there's no Arab science fiction, so he was kind of saying, yeah, there is, and like that Quranic images are kind of, some of them are like almost like science fiction, or like if you just look elsewhere or kind of look in different ways, you'll find kind of futurist kind of images, but also referring to kind of more fables and different kinds of material then, so trying to look further back than the modern Arab novel writing.
I suppose also the nation building project in much of the Arab world is, so in terms of the fiction and particularly modernist tropes like the novel or play, where they're being used to construct society. I suppose science fiction has a lesser urgency or relevance or even attraction for the young writer. I don't know.
I think there was I think during times of revolutions, these are times when there's like forward thinking, like yes, we're going to change the future and like we can do it, we can do things. I think in the 50s, there was a moment when there was like a lot of translations of science fiction and some kind of derivative forms of science fiction local. And there was much about the spirit of also Nasser, future-looking, man conquers machine and time, and so this kind of thing. But now there's still but maybe it comes at moments. Then it was relevant science fiction in that moment, of like we're looking to the future. The work in the video in Para Site is completely different. Colorful nature, lovers talking.
Can you say briefly a little bit about
Yes. So this is the first in a series, hopefully, of publications that I started with a like another friend, an artist and curator from Jordan, Ala Younes. We have worked together on many things, and this is one of them. So we thought we would like to present a series of how-to manuals to the public and outside of art spaces, so that we can sell it on the street or sell it in bookstores, and so and that we would like to commission people who feel really an urgency to teach someone something, And the first one is like how to disappear. It's written by an Egyptian writer called Haytham Wardani, and he was like interested in sound in many ways. And he had come up with, I had worked with him before and on another book, he came up with the first, this book has two texts. The first text is a series of exercises that are like on how to disappear, how to reappear, how to listen to your inner voice, how to find meaning in dead time, how to change your frequency, how to join a group, and how to break with a group. So these are, and all these are like kind of dealing with sound, your inner sound, the external sound, and like exercises like this. And the other second text is like a glossary of terms that relate to sound, but it's every term is explained through a kind of, there's a little story or a fiction. Yeah, so so this is the first one, How to Disappear, and we would like to, we thought it's, we would like to use this format of how-tos as a vehicle to insert kind of different, less direct or different ways, kinds of languages and different kinds of writers than you usually find in kind of how-to series. So yeah, we are looking for and accepting proposals for other how-to books. This is just the first one. Yeah.
So we're just at the 2 o'clock mark, and I'm sure people will be hungry. Do we have any last questions, or should we just have a pizza and we can chat over there? Yeah. So thank you to Maha for coming over.